Hi, I'm Brenda Quintana coming to you from the Beehive. Today I'm going to show you how to make this gatefold card using the Love and Affection stamp set, the Floral Affection embossing folders, and the layering square framelits. I actually designed this card back in May of 2016 and I used it for a cruise swap. And what might not be first apparent when you see it flat is that it has a really cool window on the inside. So it's actually a gatefold card and it opens up like this. So one of the features of the card is that I've got this piece embossed on the inside and I've sponged and stamped it to color it. It has a greeting on the outside, but when you open it up, I've backed it up with a greeting for the inside. So it's kind of a different fancy fold card. The reason I'm bringing you this tutorial now is because recently I was asked by some of the members of my Bee Stamping with QB Facebook group if I could create a tutorial for this card because it might not be apparent just from looking at it how to make it. So I'm going to say a little shout out to my Facebook group members. Thank you so much for following me on my group, and here is the tutorial for you. So to start off, we're going to make the card base, and you're going to need your simply scored scoring board for that. And then you're going to need a piece of soft sky cardstock. And I've cut this piece to 8.5 inches by 5.5 inches. And I'm going to put the long side up at the top of my scoring board. And then I'm going to score it at the 2 1/8 inch mark and the 6 3/8 inch mark. You can then set this piece aside for the moment. Then you're going to need your Big Shot, and I'm using my magnetic platform here because it makes lining up my framelits a little easier. So I've got my platform down. I'll need one of my cutting plates, and then I'll need a piece of Dapper denim cardstock, and this is roughly a 3.5 inch square. Then I'm going to need my layering square framelits, and I'm going to need the second largest scallop square. And I'm going to need my 4th largest smooth square. So we're going to create a frame for the window. So I'm just going to put the bigger of the two framelits on the outside. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight on this particular piece, but the inside square does need to be perfectly centered. So just make sure that this inside square is centered in this bigger square. And when that looks good, then you can take your second cutting plate and put it on top and run it through. And here is the frame that it creates. So let's bring back in the card base, and we need to fold this along the score lines. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use my bone folder to smooth down the fold. Then let's bring it in on the other side. I'm just going to turn it to make it easier for myself and smooth down that fold. So then I want to make myself a little mark 5/8 of an inch down from the top right along the center of the card. And then I'm going to take my frame and I'm going to make sure that my pencil mark is where the inside of the frame is going to line up. So I'm going to create a template for making my window cuts. So I want to have this frame perfectly centered. So you're going to make sure it dissects the frame right at the inside top corner and the bottom top corner here. So when you've got that lined up, you're going to use a pencil to trace the lines on the inside of this frame so that you're going to know where to line up your square framelit and cut it. So you can see my frame marked on here like that. So I have my Big Shot here again, and I've got my magnetic platform and a cutting plate. And I'm going to open up my card. So you can see I've got half of my square right here and half of my square right there. So I'm going to need 2 passes of the Big Shot in order to cut these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into my Big Shot like that. I'm going to take the 4th largest smooth square, the one that I used to create the inside of the frame, and I'm going to line it up on the pencil mark. You probably can just see just a hint of the pencil line just on the inside. And when that looks good, you're going to take your other cutting plate and put it on top. Careful not to shift it. And then you're going to go ahead and cut it. And here's what the first part of the window looks like. And then we can actually roll the Big Shot back the other way. So since I've got this piece to cut over on this side, I can do the same thing with my square over on this side. Just move this a bit into the camera so you can see it. And I can just see a hint of the pencil line on the inside of the square. And when that looks good, I'm going to put my cutting plate down. Careful not to shift anything. And now I'm going to roll it backwards through the Big Shot. And here is my card base with the window. So now when I fold this up, you'll see that you have a window that matches up. So now I want to create this greeting piece for the outside and for the inside. So I've still got my magnetic platform here. I've got a cutting plate sitting on here. I'm going to be using the same square as I used for the frame, but this time we're going to use it a little bit differently. I'm going to have the cutting surface facing up so that I can line up my pieces on it. So I've cut 2 pieces of Whisper White cardstock, and I've cut them to 3.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. To make them identical, I'm actually going to layer them on top of each other. And then I'm going to line them up with a scallop on one side and a scallop on the other side. I want them to be symmetrical. So let me hold this up to the camera. That's what I'm doing. So we're going to have scallops on the ends of each of those greeting pieces. Once it looks good and symmetrical to your eye, you're going to put your second cutting plate on top and run it through. And here are the little pieces I created. And when I layer them together, they should back each other up perfectly when I go to put the card together. I'm going to put my magnetic platform away so we can do some embossing. I'm going to bring my regular platform in, and I don't need this thin die adapter piece, so let me put that away. I'm going to need the base platform. I'm going to need a cutting plate, and I'll use a second cutting plate afterwards. And you're going to need a piece of Whisper White cardstock, and I've cut this piece to 4 1/8 inches by 5.5 inches. The Floral Affection embossing folders come with 2 folders, and we're not going to need this edge piece right here. We're going to be using this flower piece. So we're going to take the embossing folder, and I'm going to have it come down from the top of my card, so it's coming down on one of the short sides. And I want to make sure that it's centered. Just make sure you have the same amount of Whisper White on this side as you do on that side. And then once you have that centered, I'm going to run it through the Big Shot, but I'm going to run it through the fold side of the embossing folder last. So let me put this down and let me run this through. And there's your embossed piece. So now we're going to do some stamping, and we're going to start with this embossed piece. And I'm going to need my Dapper Denim ink pad. Let me open that up. And we're going to be using the Love and Affection stamp set to stamp on these embossed areas. So let's start off with the center of this big flower. There are 5 sets of arms that come out from this flower center, and 2 of them have 3 fingers extending from them. And you'll notice the same kind of line up here. So before you go and ink this up, just have a look to see which way this is oriented. And then that way you won't have to try and figure it out once you have the ink on it. So I'm going to ink this up in my Dapper Denim, and I'm just going to hover it over. Now, it does not need to be perfect. We're just kind of highlighting the embossing. Then I'm going to do the same for the smaller flower. And this one just has 1 with 3 fingers on it. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm orienting it correctly. And again, don't worry about being too perfect. We are just kind of highlighting, and I'm just going to kind of rotate this a little bit on the embossing. And then I'm going to come in and do these little flowers. So I've got my smallest little flower right here, and I'm just going to try and make sure that I'm getting over top of that flower. I'm going to rotate it, wiggle it a little bit. I'm going to do the same for this one right here. And I'm going to do the same for this one right here. And then we've got one more flower up here at the top, and this is the 4-petal flower. So let me ink that up. And I'm just going to make sure I'm kind of lined up over that. I'm going to rotate it and wiggle it just a little bit. So you can see it's not 100% perfect, but it's allowing me to highlight the centers and the flowers. Next, I'm going to bring in my Wild Wasabi ink pad. And I've got two types of leaves that I need to stamp on. So I've got this leaf up at the top, and for this one I just have the center part, so I don't have an outside piece, but I'm going to use this to stamp on the center part. And I just kind of give it a little wiggle, and then I'm going to use this leaf down here to match up these leaves. So just try and make sure you get it as centered as possible. Again, we're just trying to highlight the leaves a little bit like that. Then while we have the Wild Wasabi out here, I'm going to use a sponge dauber, and I'm going to take some Wild Wasabi ink, and I'm just going to gently hit the embossing with my sponge dauber. It might smudge just a little bit on the outside, but don't worry, that's part of the charm of this particular design. And then we're going to take our Soft Sky ink pad and another sponge dauber, and this time we're going to do the flowers. And there you go. That's what the inside panel looks like when it's done. Next, we're going to stamp the greetings on these pieces. So I've got them back to back, so I'm going to keep them that way. And I'm going to bring back in my Dapper Denim ink pad. And first I'm going to stamp this greeting. It says, "Sending a smile your way." Ink it up in the Dapper Denim. Make sure it looks centered, and when you like how it looks, stamp down like that. And I'm going to flip it over to the other side, and this time I'm going to stamp "You make me ridiculously happy." And again, I'm just going to make sure it's centered, and once I like how that looks, I'm going to come and stamp it down like that. So now I'm going to bring back in my card base and my Soft Sky ink pad, and I'm going to take this branch with leaves on it, and we're just going to stamp it in a few places on my card base. So I'm going to stamp it up top here on this corner, and I'm going to stamp it coming down here on this corner, and then I'm going to turn it around and stamp it coming down here. Just keeping in mind that there's going to be a little bit of a frame coming around here, so you might not want it too close to the frame. So now we just need to assemble this card, and let's start off with the frame. And we need to actually cut this frame in half. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in half, going on the diagonal. And then I'm going to glue it to the card base with some Tombow glue. Just run a bead of glue along the frame. And then just make sure you're lining it up with the window. Just take a moment to make sure it looks good. When you like how that looks, press it down. And then let's do the other side. And just line it up with the window again. Line it up with the edge. Make sure it looks good, like that. Then let's do the greetings, and let's make sure I have the right greeting on the outside. So I want to do "Sending a smile your way." So I'm going to want to make sure that I glue this down centered on this piece, but I'm just going to glue it down on the one side. So I'm going to lift this up, and I'm going to put a little bit of Tombow just halfway on this side. I'm going to bring this back in and make sure it looks centered, and then I'm going to glue this down like that. Then let me open this up, and I want to align these two pieces together. This time I can put Tombow on this whole piece, because it's going to attach right here and along here. And I'm just going to make sure I line it up when I glue it down like that. Then I'm going to take my inside panel and I'm just going to run a small bead of glue just along the outside. And I'm going to line it up in between my score marks so that it closes properly like that. And then when we close this card, we're almost done. We just need one more thing. I want to put a little bit of ribbon down here. So for that, I'm going to use some Dapper Denim Ruched ribbon. And I've already tied my ribbon into a little bow. And I'm going to use a mini glue dot to attach it. They're on this roll. You can barely see them, but I just like to push the knot of the bow onto a glue dot and then lift off. And then I can just bring this over here on this side. And once I like where it looks, I can push it down onto the card. And so there you go. You've got a really interesting gatefold card with a window in it, with an embossed folder that has been colored, plus a double greeting. So I think the person that receives this card will think it's really special. All the supplies you'll need to make this gatefold card are available for purchase on my blog. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Bye for now. If you like this tutorial, be sure to check out all the free with purchase tutorials available on my blog. The Sweet and Sassy Heart Boxes tutorial is just one of the exclusive tutorials that you can choose free with a minimum purchase in my Stampin' Up! Store.